Afterwards, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them, and they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you'll find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment round him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was how the 3rd time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The 3rd time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
There was nothing else to do, so I went back to fishing. We knew he was alive, we had seen him, and then he went away without leaving instructions. So I said, "Let's go back to fishing," and the others agreed. I mean, we had to feed ourselves somehow. You can't exist on fresh air and memories. So we went back to the fishing and caught nothing. I wondered if we had lost our touch, or if, I hesitate to say this, it was some kind of punishment from God. And then, in the morning, somebody shouted that our nets were on the wrong side. "What does he know?" I grunted, but to please the others I hauled them in and cast them back out. And when the net began to strain, I had this funny feeling in the pit of my stomach. "What does he know?" I had grunted. Now I knew who he was, and he knew that he knew everything. When we got back to the shore, he didn't give me or any of us a fight. He just said, "Would you like some breakfast?" And then he fed us. I only realised why he had fed us when, in a private moment, he looked me straight in the face 3 times and said, "Peter, do you love me?" The first time I was embarrassed. The second time I was annoyed. And the 3rd time I was convinced. "Yes, I love you. You know I do." "Then feed my lambs and feed my sheep." And then I realised that he had fed us so that we could feed others, and that he loved us so that he could leave others the same way.
Our reading brings us almost to the end of John's Gospel and to one of the last recorded post-resurrection appearances of Jesus. Indeed, it is the last in this particular Gospel. And we find the disciples, or 7 of them at least, back in Galilee, on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. They are there perhaps in response to Jesus' command to go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. But even if this is the case, it seems as if they are at a loss. They have previously met with the risen Lord, but they are not yet fully equipped to do the work that is being asked of them. So what do? They go fishing. Why? Is it hunger that drives them to seek food? Is it insecurity that makes them turn to the familiar? Or is it simply boredom that makes them want to do something, anything, to relieve their tedium? Whatever the reason, it is Peter who is looked upon as the leader of the group. Once he decides to go fishing, then the others wish to join him. Fishing for many of the disciples was their livelihood, their area of expertise and their familiar territory. They are, in the end, going back to what they know. And so they go and fish and catch nothing. Then a man, who they don't yet recognise but is actually Jesus, calls to them from the shore as day breaks. He asks them whether they have caught any fish, and when they say they have not, he proceeds to tell them where they can, and subsequently do catch a great haul. Do you hear echoes here of when Jesus called the first disciples, as depicted in Luke chapter 5? A familiar scene of casting the net, we're told, even though the search previously has been fruitless. We have here an illustration. There is more for us than simply the miraculous catch, for the disciples are seeking to go their own way, but they end up failing. They will soon be out on the mission field where it will not do for them to go their own way. They are being reminded about whose voice it is that they need to listen out for as they seek to do the work of mission. Then John notices who the man on the shore is. There is recognition. He is observant. Something that is fitting for the one whose gospel is so rich and descriptive. He tells Peter, who then dresses, not from nakedness but from workwear, and then, impetuous as ever, rushes to Jesus. The other disciples follow with the catch, a catch that they could not pull back in. When they reach Jesus, they find him at a charcoal fire. And here another memory stirs. For the Greek word for charcoal fire, anthrachia, only appears twice in the whole of the New Testament. One is here in this story at the beach. The other is in John chapter 18, verse 18, after Jesus has been arrested and Peter was following to see what was going to happen. It says there, now the servants and officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. And following this moment, Peter went on to deny Jesus 3 times. The disciples then share breakfast with Jesus there on the shore, and it was after they had eaten together, an act that in itself was a powerful message and symbol of unity and friendship. It was after that Jesus took Peter aside and spoke with him. Perhaps of all the disciples, Peter had the most to fear or to be anxious about when meeting the risen Jesus. Or at least, perhaps Peter felt that he had the most to fear when meeting the risen Jesus. For he knew more than anyone else how he had failed his Lord, and he knew the guilt, the pain, the embarrassment, the grief that had been his ever since Jesus had been arrested. And yet, despite his anxieties, despite his fears, despite his worries, when he does meet Jesus, he discovers that there are no recriminations. Instead, in their place, what he finds is forgiveness, restoration, and an opportunity to start again. As Jesus takes Peter aside, he asks him, "Do you love me more than these?" What is Jesus asking him here? Is he asking, do you love me more than you love these boats and fish? Is he asking, do you love me more than you love these other disciples? Or is he asking, do you love me more than the others love me? Whatever the meaning, and however Peter interprets the question himself, his answer is yes. And Jesus tells him to feed the sheep and tend the flock. This whole procedure is repeated 2 more times. It is clearly painful to Peter. But there is an act of restoration at work. The thrice repeated question draws our attention to the denials that Peter made when he was last gathered by a charcoal fire. Then there was denial and shame. Now there is grace and forgiveness. It is the same for us. Grace and forgiveness are always offered to us. God will accept us because he loves us and he desires for us to love him and to want to serve him. For without exception, Jesus has reason to be disappointed with us. Without exception, he has reason to be angered by our behaviour. And without exception, I am sure that he is frustrated by our inability to understand what he has taught and where he is leading us. And yet, each time he meets us, he seeks to reassure us. Each time he meets us, he reaches out to us. Each time he meets us, he teaches by his own actions how we should live. Peter was a failure in so many ways. He was the one who said that he would never leave Jesus, and yet he was the one who had perhaps acted in the most cowardly of ways. But here, at the side of the lake, we see Jesus loving him, caring for him, restoring him, and commissioning him. And we can experience the same if we accept our failings and are willing to let them go and seek to move on in our relationship with God. Remember, this isn't just a story. This isn't just a snapshot of a moment in time. Rather, it is an instant that reveals to us how God can work in each of our lives. If, instead of trying to struggle with the burdens of life on our own, we look to Jesus and listen for his voice, we can discover the healing power of forgiveness in our own lives. We can find ourselves restored, and we can know the reality and truth of the promise of new life as we are given the opportunity to begin again with God. As we come to the end of our passage, we find Jesus assigning a role of leadership to Peter, and we are reminded of the words that Jesus spoke to him on an earlier occasion in Matthew's Gospel. You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. There then follows a prophecy about Peter's future, and our reading ends with Jesus saying to Peter, follow me. Thus, as it began, so it ends. The message is still the same. In this way, nothing has changed, even though so much has happened. The same is both true and not true for us. The message is still follow me, for it will always be the message that Jesus gives. We are to follow him all our lives, and we are to follow wherever he leads. Yet we cannot say that nothing has changed in other regards. Life for us now is vastly different to what it was only just over 2 months ago. And life beyond the summer will almost certainly not be the same as it was as 2020 began. A change in our way of living has come upon us. We didn't want it to happen in the way that it has, but it has nevertheless come. It is up to us how we respond to the challenges and the opportunities that this change brings. Things will not return to what they were for a long time. That is, if they ever do. So what will we do? How will we move forward into this new normal? We will do so by allowing Jesus to come alongside us, by listening to his words of forgiveness, by remembering that he loves us, by being open to his grace, and by hearing his message, follow me. May we rejoice in the truth that we are loved by God, and may we seek to follow Jesus and walk in his way as we look to respond to the challenges and the opportunities that lay ahead of us. Amen.